Mic check, mic check. Cool. So I go by the artist name R. Tyler. I'm based here in San Francisco. And let's start with two truths and a lie. So first one, I grew up Amish and didn't believe in electricity until I came to an algo rave at Gray Area. And it changed my life. Number two, I was in 2024 runner-up for Computer Music Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. And then three is, this will be my 8th time performing at Gray Area. So those are all lies. Those are all lies. Everyone should know that. All three of those are lies. I grew up next to the Amish country. I'm lucky to be alive. And this will be my 7th time today. And it still feels like just as big of an honor as it did the first time. This place is incredible and gives so much to a really tight-knit collection of people that are some of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. So, all right, jokes are over. I'm gonna just play this TikTok that I made.
Can you tell me what the most beautiful sound or the most interesting sound that you've ever...
Has anyone seen this before?
Could you tell me what the most beautiful sound or the most interesting sound that you've ever heard is?
No.
So what do you think about melody?
This is Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. I love the guy so much. This is the least effort I ever put into anything I put online, and it had the most of a splash. It ended up getting taken by other short video accounts and then blew up from there. But this interview is really, really good, and I'm gonna draw some quotes from it later. I would say it kept me on the right trajectory as an artist, and I owe so much to this father of electronic music, if you will. So to outline my talk, I'm gonna start with some portmanteaus that got me hooked into the processes that I use. I'm going to talk about why live code. There's many reasons, I'm just going to touch on them. And I'll also mention what I think people like about music. And I hope this encourages discussions with each other after the talk, or with me especially, because I'm always learning about what draws people to different types of music. Then the majority of my talk will be about my process. How do you do these things? How do you use algorithms to play with sound? So these are the two portmanteaus that I found in 2018. First one, you might be familiar with it. It's over 10 years old now as a term, but it's called Algorave. It started in the UK by a friend named Alex McLean, and it's a combination of the words algorithm and rave. The other thing I found in 2018 was Zen harmonic music, which comes from the prefix xeno, like aliens, and harmony, and this refers to music where the notes are dramatically different from what you can find on a piano. Just unusual frequency ratios that don't sound like anything we're used to hearing. And then a couple years later, a friend, Rob, he sent me this meme. It's the music genre obscurity iceberg, which you can find on the ultimate and most possible and complete music genre iceberg version 3. And lo and behold, at the bottom of the iceberg, in the Beyond Humanity section, you find aleatoric music, which is like using randomness and stochasticity. You find generative electronics. And you also find Zen harmonic music. So these two things just happen to be hyper obscure to the point where you'd put them on the bottom of the list of like 70 different genres of music. So about where I am now. That's where I was 8 years ago. I like to host events where artists get together, and I like to use code to create all of my beats still. And I project everything so that people can see it, and it's intentionally a little illegible. I blow it up really big so you can read it, but I don't want to be so transparent that people can just take it and turn it into something else that it wasn't meant to be. But I do open source all of my code. This is a set at South by Southwest. It's a venue called Data Lab. Highly recommend that place. It's kind of like the sister venue of this one in Austin. And this is one of the most fun shows I ever played. This is at Livecode New York in Brooklyn. They really know how to dance, which is, it's always incredible to visit them. And I just did that this past weekend with Glossing, who's here in the audience from Chicago. So I've been playing a lot of shows, putting out a lot of music, and the consistency in all of my work is that I use algorithms and I make dance music. And I use algorithms not just for dancing, but for harmony, which has correlates to emotions and feelings, and composers know how to stimulate what people feel by changing the scale, changing the chords, things like that. I also write code for sound design. And sound design, timbre, the quality of a sound, has been shown in numerous scientific studies to be a strong way to excite nostalgia and bring people back to specific moments. Rhythm is for dancing, and all three of these things are deeply intellectual. If you look deeply enough, you have to look deeply, but there's so much uncharted territory in all three of these areas. Another reason why I like to code dance music is because I get version-controlled sheet music for free. And the tools are free and open source. And if there's going to be something really, really different happening from a musician somewhere in the globe, it's probably going to happen through the free and open source tools that people are putting out, the passion projects. If it's cool, it's probably outside of the realm of capitalism. All right. Why do people like music? I think people like being mentally stimulated, seeing something interesting they don't recognize or new or refreshing, something that satisfies the brain. People also like music that makes them want to move their body, things that have tempos that resonate with the ways we can move biophysically, things that make us want to jump up and down, bass frequencies, things that physically shake us. And then there's the emotional element. And I think that we tend to get the mental element for free if we're doing something algorithmic with a relatively obscure process, especially if it's something you can only do with algorithms. I think we get that component for free. So much of my work focuses on the body and the feelings, the things that really pull at our heartstrings. But the intellectual part is super, super important. And I'm going to come back to Stockhausen. This is a quote from Pitchfork Media on the band Can, an early krautrock band from Germany. Pitchfork says, "It was intellectual but funky, serious music that was also fun and interesting." And I saw that as maybe a teenager. I was super young. And Can was mentored by Stockhausen. He's a guy who basically told them how to play rhythm. And this connected with me when I read it the first time, and it's lasted ever since. All right, so I'm going to talk about things you can do with computers and music, and it'll be a little theoretical, So this is why I was sharing some silly memes in the beginning and jokes about Computer Music Magazine. Scales, rhythms, and the harmonic series are all things you can tackle with code. And the first two have a lot of similarities. In computational music theory, you can analyze scales with lists. And they're lists where you can use modular arithmetic to transpose and keep the pitch information in the right octave. And there's a notion that if you play a C4 and play a C5, double the frequency, they're qualitatively the same note. They're not exactly the same, but in some sense they're equivalent. And if you assume they're perfectly equivalent, the mathematical structure that you can use to explore these is called a necklace in combinatorics. It looks like this. It's just a bunch of dots. It's a simple class of graphs. Rhythms are also necklaces. These are Euclidean rhythms from the book The Geometry of Musical Rhythm. And you can represent this Cuban rhythm called the tresillo with 0, 3, 6 in the modulo 8 space. Strudel code would just be x 3, 8, just like that. And this book is what I was reading when I first got into live coding. I highly recommend it. These Euclidean rhythms are, in a sense, the hello world for the language TidalCycles and Strudel. Kingdom here has definitely used these as hello world in his incredible tutorials that helped me learn from scratch. And what's cool about these rhythms is they're purely math-based, but they also exist all over the world in different cultures that, for the most part, had very little connection to one another at the time that they were first used as traditional music. There's something about them that is fascinating, and that's why you should read the book. All right, so back to mathematical necklaces. This is the math you have to do. This is the algebraic space where all this stuff happens. So n can be your notes per octave, which is usually 12, but it doesn't have to be. It can be like 19 or 31, and you split up the octave into a bunch of different equal parts. N could also be the number of rhythmic subdivisions. So 16-beat is most common for dance music. You could do 18-beat or 32-beat or 24-beat. And these live coding languages make all this stuff really easy. And the pseudo-equivalence I was talking about earlier with octaves being very similar, but not quite the same, that implies a helical structure. And I'm not the first person to think about this, but Alex McLean in 2020 wrote about this. And I thought it's so cool because if rhythm is a helix and harmony is a helix, if you have a melody, that means at every point on the helix, you have another helix spiraling around in some 4-dimensional or 6-dimensional space. Yeah, so that's something that I love to just daydream about. But let's talk about things that I've built that are practical for my process. Some open source music projects of mine include computational harmony, which is a glimpse into how jazz scales are connected, similar to how the circle of fifths works for regular C major, D major, G major kind of scales. And it's this complex network that you can't fit into 2D without overlapping. It's on this high-dimensional kind of Mobius strip. And the way I was able to do this is because I got to learn a lot of data science techniques and a little network theory in my training as a scientist. And there's so much low-hanging fruit for taking maybe state-of-the-art or just really technical tools from one domain and then applying it to a different one. I posted it on Reddit, and a lot of people were thrilled to read about it, and they thought it was fascinating and shed a lot of light, connected some dots to some of the stuff that Jacob Collier talks about with brightness and darkness in scales and how that relates to emotion as well. But at the end of the day, this is all just like nerdy Python-based set theory. This is taken from an R package that's used to visualize bacterial genomes. And here I'm using it to represent musical rhythms. All right, so the last thing in this technical part is going to be the harmonic series. The harmonic series is easiest to understand if you've ever played a guitar, and you can put your finger on the midpoint of the string and you'll hear a harmonic. That note is an octave above, but you can keep moving your fingers over the strings and you get different harmonics, and they're related. It turns out as you find newer harmonics on the guitar string, every frequency is an integer multiple of the first frequency. So let's say that your string is tuned to 100 hertz, you'll get 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 hertz. And the first few are pretty close to the kinds of intervals that we're used to hearing in Western music, and the notes that are on pianos, the notes that are on a 12-fret guitar. However, when you get to this third, this is the major third, it's 14 cents flat in the harmonic series, and we can definitely hear that difference. It's noticeable. We can hear something like 2 cents, especially if it's a chord. It makes a big difference. If you're tuning an instrument or tuning a drum kit, then this harmonic seventh interval is almost halfway between the B flat and the A. So it's like almost perfectly in between two notes you can play on a piano. So it sounds very different, and you hear this interval a lot in techno music. You hear it a lot in the more sound design, less melodic kinds of music, and it's great. You also hear all of these intervals and many more in our voices. Every time you hear somebody speak, you're hearing this harmonic series. And this spectrogram shows that it goes up to at least the 16th harmonic. I only showed up to the 7th, and you get many more kind of exotic musical intervals that are very underutilized in popular music, that are sort of like, I think of it as where I want popular music to go. In the same way that jazz found all these new harmonies in the middle of the 20th century, I think this century will be, hopefully, about this kind of stuff. And there's so many artists already doing this. Nathan Ho explores microtonality. He's performing tonight. There's this artist named Alexi Perala that I'm quite honestly obsessed with. I did a music theoretical investigation into how he tunes his frequencies. It turns out they're all perfect interharmonic series intervals, which was really cool because nobody really knew where these frequencies were coming from. At least on the internet. I'm probably wrong. I bet someone else out there is just as obsessed with why this artist's music sounds so radically different from what other people are pushing out. And the last open source project that I'm going to share is something that used to be a hallmark of my live performances. I'm going to use a little bit of it today, but I wrote some converters for taking piano playing, translating that into complex but human-readable code that looks like this. So this would be my piano playing. And I just recorded it on my MIDI piano and then exported it to Strudel code. So then you can live code your piano playing and make edits to the numbers. And together, these things that I shared, these topics, these mini projects, these just pure exploratory investigations, these, I think, to me, excite me the same way that Stockhausen was excited about new sound worlds. I'll touch on that in the next slide, but to summarize, I'm all about rhythm exploration, Zen harmonic algorithms, finding intervals in the harmonic series, figuring out what they are, what you can use them for. I'm all about thinking about these microtonal harmonies in the harmonic series as intervals that exist in the space between sound design and harmony, because you can make drum sounds with them. You can make instruments that sound clanky with them. You don't need to use them to make melodies and harmonies. You can use them just to make very alien, as it's aptly named, kinds of sounds. And then the last one would be code generators, which I use to make my computer sound more human, to take my piano playing, turn that into numbers, and then remix those numbers with math. And then you can just sort of pretend you're a laptop. So back to Stockhausen. I love the way, after he said no, he just looked so surprised and ashamed. You can tell he wasn't really proud of how he answered the first interview question. I love that so much. But here's a quote from the rest of his interview. In Germany, we had a situation after the war, after World War II. And we still have a situation I guess this is in the 90s or early 2000s, we still have a situation where the traditional music is overestimated. And by that he means overrated. And he's saying the Baroque music, the classical music, the romantic music is dominating. And music that has developments or new discoveries, new sound worlds, those are not wanted by the music world. It's not just the consumers, but it's the people making the music. They're not interested in these new things, for the most part. But, he says, there's a lot of music lovers and connoisseurs who study my music, and that is enough. And so that's where I set my expectations as an artist. If Stockhausen, if he just realized that let's just be grateful for the handful of people from all over who see what you're doing, if you recognize them and keep them close to you as friends, that should be enough. And this is 75 years ago. It feels very similar today, at least with my personal experiences in San Francisco, online, on these wonderful social media apps. And then the last Stockhausen quote is, whenever I felt happy about having discovered something, the first encounter, not only with the public, with other musicians, with specialists, etc., was that they rejected it. So that's a downer, right? This guy was exploring sound design for 12 hours a day, coming up with so many new sounds, and everyone hated everything new that he was proud of. But I think since Stockhausen survived all of these haters, all of us can too. We have to just be unfazed by it, because this already happened in the past. We just have to hold on to the people around us who enrich our lives in these interesting sonic world explorations. Thanks so much. We're going to take a bathroom break, and I'll start my set in about 3 to 5 minutes.